The true treasure had been the resilience I discovered in myself when that deception was revealed. The capacity to act decisively in my own interest, to rebuild from betrayal, and ultimately, to choose release over resentment when the opportunity presented itself. The dream house had never really been mine, despite the legal documents proving ownership. But the life I was now creating, that belonged to me completely. 6 months after selling the Pinecrest house to James, I stood in the center of my newly renovated Victorian on Maple Street, watching as afternoon sunlight streamed through the original stained glass transom, casting prismatic patterns across hardwood floors I'd painstakingly restored with my own hands. The house was finally complete, or at least as complete as a 120-year-old home ever truly becomes, after months of careful renovation that had preserved its historic character while updating systems and spaces for modern living. "I still can't believe you did most of this yourself," Sophia remarked, running her hand appreciatively along the crown molding I'd stripped and refinished over countless weekends. "When did you become so handy?" "YouTube University," I joked, though the truth was more complex. The physical labor of restoration had become a form of therapy for me, tangible, measurable progress that provided a counterbalance to the more ambiguous emotional recovery I was navigating. Each stripped layer of paint, each carefully repaired piece of woodwork, each wall returned to its original glory represented not just improvement to the house, but reclamation of my own capability. "Well, it's stunning," Sophia declared, accepting the glass of Champtoral her husband spent our savings on his girlfriend. Then I showed them who really owned their dream house. I watched my husband's face turn ashen as I slid the property deed across the table, the one with only my name on it. "This dream house was never ours, James. It was always mine." The stunned silence that fell over my parents' garden party was deafening. James stood frozen beside Olivia, my colleague of 3 years, both of them staring at the document like it was a venomous snake. The shock in his eyes when he realized I had discovered not only their affair, but also his scheme to drain our joint savings account was absolutely priceless. No one steals from a financial advisor and gets away with it, especially one who learned to read the fine print before signing anything. My mother's prized rose garden had always been the backdrop for our family's happiest moments, anniversaries, engagements, milestone birthdays. The century-old oak tree provided perfect shade for the elegant white tables arranged in a semicircle, crystal glasses catching the late afternoon sunlight, fine china gleaming. Today, it would witness the most dramatic confrontation our family had ever seen. A confrontation I had meticulously planned for weeks. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I stood at the edge of the garden, watching guests arrive in their summer finery. My parents' Victorian home in Oak Ridge's Heritage District had always been my sanctuary, its wraparound porch and stained glass windows representing stability and family values. Values I thought James and I shared when we exchanged vows 4 years ago. "Elaine, sweetheart, is everything all right?" My mother, Helen, appeared beside me, her silver hair swept into an elegant updo, concern etched across her face. She had always been perceptive, especially when it came to her children. As a retired psychology professor, not much escaped her attention. "Everything's fine, Mom," I assured her, adjusting the sleeve of my emerald dress, the one James had always said made my eyes look their most striking. I'd chosen it deliberately today. "Just making sure everything's perfect for Dad's retirement celebration." Helen studied me carefully, unconvinced. "You've been distant all week. And you arrived hours early to help, but spent most of the time in your old bedroom with the door closed. You know you can tell me anything." For a moment, I considered confessing everything. About discovering James had withdrawn nearly $200,000 from our joint savings over the past 6 months, about finding the text messages between him and Olivia, planning their future together in what they called our dream house. about learning that the house I had poured my heart and finances into was intended to be their love nest, a house James believed was in both our names, never bothering to read the paperwork I'd prepared as the sole buyer. Instead, I patted my purse where the property deed and bank statements waited. "I know, Mom. Everything will make sense soon. I promise." Helen's eyes narrowed slightly, but she nodded, years of respecting her adult children's privacy winning out over motherly concern. "Your father is excited everyone's coming today. 40 years at the university deserves a proper send-off." I smiled genuinely at that. My father, Robert Mitchell, had been a pillar of the Oak Ridge University Economics Department for 4 decades. His retirement party had provided the perfect gathering for what I needed to do. Everyone would be here: my brother Daniel and his wife Rachel, my in-laws William and Margaret, James's sister Natalie and her husband Greg, and most importantly, James and his surprise guest. "They're here," Daniel called from the porch, his voice carrying across the garden. My brother had always been my protector, my confidant. When I'd told him fragments of what was happening 2 days ago, he'd offered to take care of James in ways that would have certainly involved broken bones. I'd talked him down, explaining I had a better plan, one that would hit James where it really hurt: his pride and his wallet. I took a deep breath, smoothing down my dress and squaring my shoulders. The woman who walked toward the party was not the same one who had stood trembling in her office 3 weeks ago, staring at bank statements that revealed her husband's betrayal. That woman had cried, had questioned what she'd done wrong, had wondered if she'd been blind to the signs. The woman I was today had done her research, consulted her lawyer, and secured her future. James appeared at the garden entrance, looking like he'd stepped out of a magazine in his tailored blue suit. His dark hair was freshly cut, his smile confident as he greeted my parents with warm hugs. Behind him stood Olivia, her blonde hair cascading over bare shoulders exposed by a pale pink sundress. My colleague, my supposed friend. The woman who had been helping my husband select fixtures and finishes for my new house while planning to live there herself. "Elaine!" James called, his voice carrying that practiced warmth that had once made me feel like the center of his universe. "There you are, beautiful." He approached, leaning in to kiss my cheek as if nothing was amiss. I allowed it, feeling nothing but the cool detachment I'd cultivated over the past 3 weeks. "James," I smiled, meeting his eyes directly. "I see you've brought Olivia." I extended my hand to her, watching as confusion and guilt flickered across her face. "How nice." "Olivia helped stage the Henderson property," James explained smoothly to my parents. "I thought it would be nice to include her today since we've all become such good friends." My father raised an eyebrow but said nothing, years of academic diplomacy serving him well. My mother merely smiled, but I recognized the look in her eyes, the same one she gave students she suspected of plagiarism. "Of course," I said. "Olivia. And I go way back. In fact, she's been instrumental in helping design the interior for the house in Pinecrest Estates." I watched James's expression carefully, noticing the momentary flash of panic. He hadn't expected me to know about her involvement with the house. "The new development?" my father asked, interest piqued. "I heard those properties were selling before they were even completed." "Yes," I continued smoothly. "James has been working tirelessly on it. In fact, we've secured one of the homes." I turned to James. "Perhaps you'd like to tell everyone about it during dinner?" James's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Sure, if everyone's interested." "Oh, we definitely are," Daniel interjected, appearing beside me with 2 champagne flutes. He handed one to me, his eyes never leaving James. My brother had always been protective, but today there was something dangerous in his gaze. "I've been hearing about this project for months." More guests began to arrive, filling the garden with cheerful conversation and laughter. James drifted away to greet my in-laws, Olivia following closely behind. I watched them, noting the careful distance they maintained in public, not too close but never too far from each other. "You're scary calm," Daniel murmured beside me. "You sure you don't want me to accidentally spill something on his designer suit? I'm thinking the seafood sauce would leave quite an impression." I laughed, the sound surprisingly genuine. "And ruin Mom's tablecloth? She'd never forgive you. Besides, some stains aren't visible to the naked eye, but they never truly wash out." Daniel studied me. When did my little sister become so philosophical and terrifying? When I discovered my husband had been embezzling from our joint accounts to finance a love nest for him and my colleague. I sipped my champagne, the bubbles sharp on my tongue. Life lessons come in unexpected packages. My brother's expression darkened. "I still can't believe he thought he'd get away with it. You're a financial advisor, for God's sake. Did he think you wouldn't notice $200,000 missing?" "Men like James don't think about consequences," I replied. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. They believe they're entitled to whatever they want, and that the rules don't apply to them. I paused, watching as James charmed a group of my father's colleagues, his hand occasionally brushing against Olivia's back when he thought no one was looking. But today, he learns differently. The garden party progressed like a carefully choreographed dance. Guests mingled, my father received heartfelt tributes from colleagues and former students, and my mother presided over it all with gracious efficiency. James played his part perfectly, the devoted husband, the successful businessman, the charming son-in-law. If I hadn't seen the evidence with my own eyes, I might have believed the performance myself. As the catering staff began setting up the buffet table under the oak tree, I excused myself and walked to the house. In my childhood bedroom, everything remained as it had been when I left for college 15 years ago. Academic trophies lining the bookshelf, framed photographs capturing milestones, the comfortable window seat where I'd spent countless hours reading and dreaming. I sat there now, retrieving my phone from my purse. "Everything's set," Sophia texted. My best friend since college and fellow financial advisor had been my rock through this ordeal. The locksmith confirmed the change was completed this morning. "New keys are with me. Timing good for phase 2? "Perfect," I replied. "Dinner in 20 minutes. Be ready." I stood, smoothing my dress and checking my reflection in the antique mirror above my dresser. The woman who stared back at me looked composed, determined, powerful. I hardly recognized myself, yet I felt more authentically me than I had in years. When I returned to the garden, guests were beginning to take their seats at the elegantly set tables. Name cards guided them to their places. Another detail I had quietly taken over from my mother, ensuring James and Olivia were seated directly across from me. "There she is," my father called as I approached. At 65, Robert Mitchell remained. An imposing figure, tall, broad-shouldered, with a full head of silver hair and penetrating blue eyes that could intimidate freshmen and tenured professors alike. "I was beginning to think you'd escaped your own party planning." I kissed his cheek. "Just making a quick call, Dad. Some last-minute business." "Always working," he teased. "You get that from your mother. Never could leave the job at the office." "Speaking of work," my mother interjected, joining us with a glass of white wine in hand, "I heard your firm is handling the Westridge Retirement Community account now. That's quite an achievement." Before I could respond, James appeared at my side, slipping his arm around my waist with practiced ease. My wife is too modest to brag, but she closed that deal almost single-handedly. The partners were impressed. Enough to mention Equity Track. I didn't flinch at his touch, though every nerve in my body recoiled. Instead, I smiled. It was a team effort. I glanced toward Olivia, who hovered nearby, clearly unsure of her place in this family dynamic. In fact, Olivia helped with some of the presentations. "Really?" my mother asked, her tone pleasant but her eyes sharp. "How wonderful to collaborate so closely with colleagues." Olivia shifted uncomfortably. "It was nothing, really. Elaine did all the heavy lifting." "Olivia's being modest," I continued. "We've been working very closely for months now, on all sorts of projects." I emphasized the last words slightly, watching as her cheeks flushed. "Everyone's seated," Daniel announced, rescuing Olivia from further scrutiny. "And the staff is ready to serve." We moved toward the tables, a gentle breeze carrying the scent of my mother's roses across the garden. The scene was picture-perfect: crisp white tablecloths, gleaming silverware, crystal glasses catching the golden afternoon sun. In another life, I would have reveled in this moment, surrounded by family and friends celebrating my father's achievements. Instead, I took my seat with the cold precision of a chess player advancing a queen for checkmate. James sat across from me, Olivia to his right. My parents occupied the heads of the table, with other family members and close friends filling the remaining seats. My in-laws, William and Margaret Wilson, were engaged in conversation with my brother's wife, seemingly oblivious to the undercurrents of tension. "Before we begin," my father announced, standing with a glass in hand, "I want to thank everyone for coming today. 40 years at the university has been the privilege of a lifetime, but the real achievement has been the family around this table." He looked at my mother with such evident love that my heart ached. Once I thought James looked at me that way. To family, those we're born to, and those we choose. To family, everyone echoed, raising their glasses. As the first course was served, my mother's favorite summer gazpacho, conversation flowed easily among the guests. Academic achievements, community projects, vacation plans, and local politics dominated the discussion. I participated appropriately, laughing at the right moments, asking thoughtful questions, playing the role of the perfect daughter and hostess. "James," my father-in-law called from down the table, "tell everyone about the Pinecrest project. I hear the model home is absolutely spectacular." James straightened, always eager to discuss his professional accomplishments. "It's our finest development to date. Luxury homes with every possible amenity, smart home technology, infinity pools, chef's kitchens, home theaters. We've sold almost the entire first phase before completion." "Didn't you and Elaine secure one of those homes?" my mother asked innocently, though I caught her glance in my direction. James hesitated for a fraction of a second. "Yes, we did. One of the premium lots, actually, backing up to the conservation area." "How exciting!" Margaret, James's mother, exclaimed. "When can we expect the housewarming party?" "Actually," I interjected, setting down my soup spoon, "I'd love to hear more about the interior design process. Olivia, since you've been so involved, perhaps you could share some details?" All eyes turned to Olivia, who froze mid-bite. She looked to James, who maintained his composure, though I noticed his knuckles whitening around his water glass. I've just been consulting," Olivia stammered, "making some suggestions based on current trends." "Don't be modest," I encouraged. "James tells me you've selected everything from the kitchen backsplash to the master bathroom fixtures. You have excellent taste." A heavy silence descended on the table. James cleared his throat. "Olivia has a great eye for design. We've incorporated some of her ideas into several of the Pinecrest properties." "Including ours?" I asked, my voice innocent, but my eyes challenging. "Some elements, yes," James conceded, clearly trying to navigate this conversation carefully. "But ultimately, all decisions were ours, yours and mine." I smiled, taking a sip of water. "Interesting. I don't recall approving blue Italian tile for the master shower, or the custom entertainment center in the basement." James's expression tightened. "We discussed those details, Elaine. Perhaps you don't remember." "Perhaps," I agreed. though I definitely would have remembered choosing furnishings for a house we haven't moved into yet. The delivery invoices were quite substantial. The tension around the table was palpable now. My mother-in-law looked confused, while my own parents exchanged glances. Daniel was watching the exchange with barely concealed satisfaction, while his wife Rachel studied her plate with sudden intense interest. "I think there's been some miscommunication," James said smoothly, his crisis management skills kicking in. "We discussed potential furnishings, but no final decisions have been made. Actually," I reached for my purse beneath the table. "I have the invoices right here. Paid from our joint savings account last week. $60,000 for furniture selected by and delivered to Olivia's design studio." I removed several, folded papers and placed them on the table. "Would you like to see them?" For the first time, genuine alarm flashed across James's face. He glanced at Olivia, whose complexion had gone from flushed to ashen. "This isn't the appropriate venue for this discussion, Elaine." "Oh? When would be appropriate? Perhaps when you and Olivia had moved into the house I paid for." I looked around the table. "I apologize for disrupting Dad's celebration, but I think everyone should know that James has been systematically emptying our joint savings account for the past 6 months to furnish a home he intends to share with Olivia, not me." Gasps and murmurs rippled around the table. My father half rose from his seat, but my mother placed a restraining hand on his arm. "Elaine," James hissed, "you're making a scene. Whatever you think you know." "I know exactly." "What's happening?" I interrupted, my voice steady. "I know about the $200,000 you've withdrawn. I know about the weekend trips to business conferences that were actually romantic getaways. I know you've been planning to leave me once the house was complete, thinking you'd walk away with half of everything, including a property I paid for." "You paid for?" James's mother interjected, confusion evident in her voice. "I thought you bought it together." "That's what James thought too," I replied, reaching into my purse again and extracting the property deed. "But he never actually read the paperwork I prepared. The house is solely in my name. The down payment came from my inheritance from grandmother. Money that was never part of our joint finances." I slid the deed across the table, watching as James's face turned ashen. "This dream house was never ours, James. It was always mine." The stunned silence that fell over the garden party was absolute. James stared at the document, then at me, comprehension and horror dawning in his eyes. "You can't do this," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I already have," I replied. "And that's not all." The weight of every eye at the table pressed against me, but I felt only a strange lightness. For months, I'd been carrying the burden of suspicion, then the crushing certainty of betrayal, and finally, the heavy mantle of vengeance. Now, as I revealed the truth, one devastating piece at a time, each disclosure lifted another pound from my shoulders. "What do you mean?" James demanded, his composure cracking. The charming facade that had won over clients, colleagues, and unfortunately me, was slipping to reveal the panicked man beneath. I reached into my purse again, extracting a slim folder containing bank statements, transaction receipts, and hotel invoices. Each page told its own story of deceit: weekend getaways labeled as business trips, extravagant gifts purchased on our joint credit card, cash withdrawals that had steadily drained our savings. "You were careless, James," I said, spreading the documents before him. "You left digital footprints everywhere. Did you really think I wouldn't notice hundreds of thousands of dollars disappearing from accounts I monitor professionally?" Olivia shifted uncomfortably in her seat, eyes downcast. "James told me that money was his personal savings," she murmured, barely audible. "He said you'd agreed to keep finances separate." I laughed, the sound cutting through the tension like a blade. "Is that what he told you? Just like he told you his marriage was essentially over?" I turned back to James. You always did underestimate me. That was your first mistake. Elaine, my mother-in-law Margaret began, her voice strained. There must be some explanation. James wouldn't— He did, Mom, Natalie interrupted. James's sister had been silent until now, her expression pained as she looked between her brother and me. I saw them together at the Coppervine last month. James asked me not to say anything. Another betrayal. I hadn't known Natalie was aware of the affair. The revelation shouldn't have hurt. It was merely one more person who had chosen loyalty to James over honesty with me. Yet something in me flinched at this fresh wound. You knew? Margaret turned to her daughter, aghast. And you didn't tell us? He's my brother, Natalie said weakly. He promised it was temporary, that he would end it. And yet here we are. My father spoke for the first time since the confrontation began, his voice steady but cold with barely controlled anger. Robert Mitchell had always treated James like a son, mentoring him, introducing him to valuable contacts, even investing in his first major development project, with my daughter humiliated at her own family gathering. I'm not humiliated, Dad, I said, meeting his gaze. I'm vindicated. The distinction was important. For weeks after discovering James's betrayal, I'd cycled through all the expected emotions: shock, grief, self-doubt, blinding rage. I'd questioned every aspect of our relationship, searching for signs I must have missed, ways I had failed. I'd stood before mirrors wondering if Olivia's youth and beauty had simply made me obsolete in my husband's eyes. But then, as I uncovered the extent of his financial duplicity, something had shifted within me. This wasn't about love fading or attraction dimming. This was about greed, opportunism, and the calculated exploitation of my trust. And those were things I could fight with weapons far more effective than tears or pleas. James pushed back from the table, standing abruptly. I don't have to listen to this. You want a scene, Elaine? Congratulations, you've created one. He turned to my parents. Robert, Helen, I apologize for this disruption to your celebration. Sit down, James, my father commanded, his professor's voice brooking no argument. You don't get to walk away from this. To my surprise, James hesitated, then slowly sank back into his chair. Even now, some part of him couldn't defy the man whose approval he'd sought for years. How long? William Wilson asked his son, disappointment etched into the creases around his eyes. James's father had built his accounting practice on principles of integrity and transparency, values he'd attempted to instill in his children. How long has this been going on? James remained silent, jaw clenched, so I answered for him. Based on the financial records, about 9 months. Though I suspect the emotional affair began long before that. I glanced at Olivia. Around the time she joined the Westridge project team and started attending all those late-night planning sessions, I imagine. Olivia flinched. It wasn't like that. We were just colleagues at first. Colleagues who exchanged over 2,000 text messages in a single month? I raised an eyebrow. I have the phone records, Olivia. March alone showed 2,247 messages between your numbers, many during hours when James was supposedly working late at the office. You checked my phone records? James demanded, indignation flaring. That's an invasion of privacy. The absurdity of his outrage almost made me laugh again. Says the man who's been invading our joint savings account to finance his affair. The account is in both our names, James. The phone is on our family plan, which I pay for. There was nothing illegal about my looking at those statements. This is ridiculous, he muttered, running a hand through his hair, a gesture I'd once found endearing in moments of stress. Now it just seemed calculated, another performance in his repertoire of charm. Whatever you think you know. I know that last month you closed on the Pinecrest house, listing me as co-owner without my signature? I cut in. That's fraud, James. I could press charges. His face drained of color. You wouldn't. No, I wouldn't, I agreed. Because fortunately for you, my lawyer caught it before the paperwork was processed. The title company was very apologetic when I showed them our previous correspondence indicating the house would be solely in my name. James glanced around the table, perhaps looking for sympathy or escape, but found neither. Even Olivia had created distance between them, her chair angled slightly away as if physically separating herself from his deceptions. I don't understand, Helen said, looking between James and me. Why would you put the house only in your name, Elaine? That's not like you. My mother had always been my moral compass, the voice urging fairness and compromise. She'd raised me to value partnership, equality, and trust in relationships. The disappointment in her question stung, though I knew it came from confusion rather than judgment. It wasn't my original intention, I explained gently. When we first looked at the Pinecrest development, I was excited to build our future home together, but 3 months ago I found something concerning in our financial statements. I paused, remembering the sick feeling in the pit of my stomach that day. Large withdrawals from our joint savings, money we'd been setting aside for the house. When I asked James about it, he claimed they were investments for our future, promising substantial returns. I looked directly at James. I wanted to believe him, I really did. But something felt off, so I started watching our accounts more closely. The withdrawals continued, smaller amounts, but more frequent. Meanwhile, James began suggesting changes to the house plans, expensive upgrades, premium finishes, custom features I hadn't requested. Those were investments, James insisted, though his voice lacked conviction. The housing market in Oak Ridge is booming. I was leveraging opportunities. In your mistress's design studio? I asked mildly. Because that's where most of the money went. Custom furniture, imported fixtures, art pieces, all delivered to Olivia Carter Interiors. Olivia's face flushed crimson. Those were for staging projects, client properties. Odd that the delivery addresses matched our Pinecrest lot number. Then, I replied, sliding another document across the table, a delivery confirmation with our future address clearly marked. And strange that the master bedroom furniture perfectly matched the dream bedroom Pinterest board you created and shared with James. A soft gasp came from somewhere down the table, probably Rachel, my brother's wife, who understood the significance of such digital evidence. She worked in corporate security and had often warned family members about their digital footprints. James should have listened more carefully during those holiday dinner conversations. When I realized what was happening, I continued, addressing my mother's original question. I spoke with my lawyer. She suggested modifying the purchase agreement to protect my investment. Since I was providing the entire down payment from my inheritance, she advised putting the property solely in my name. And you didn't discuss this with James? Margaret asked, her loyalties clearly torn between defending her son and acknowledging the evidence before her. I tried, I said honestly. 3 times I brought up concerns about our finances. Each time James dismissed them. I was being paranoid. I didn't understand real estate investment. I should trust him to handle these matters. I looked at my husband, remembering those gaslighting conversations that had made me question my own perceptions. So I made an executive decision to protect myself. By going behind my back, James snapped. Like you went behind mine? I countered. The difference is what I did was legal and transparent. I never hid the paperwork from you, James. You signed it yourself. You just never bothered to read what you were signing. A heavy silence fell over the table. The catering staff hovered uncertainly near the kitchen door, clearly unsure whether to proceed with serving the main course. My mother caught their eye and gave a slight nod, ever the gracious hostess even in the midst of family implosion. What happens now? Daniel finally asked, voicing the question everyone was thinking. I took a deep breath. This was the moment I'd rehearsed most carefully with Sophia and my lawyer. As of this morning, the locks on the Pinecrest house have been changed. James, your personal belongings from our current home have been packed and moved to a storage facility. I slid a small card across the table. The address and access code are here. I've paid for 3 months in advance, which should give you ample time to find new accommodations. You've evicted me? James stared at the card in disbelief. You can't just— I can, and I have, I said firmly. Our current home is also in my name. Another benefit of my paranoia about financial security. You're welcome to contest it legally, of course, but given the evidence of financial misconduct I've gathered, I wouldn't recommend it. And what about our marriage? James asked, his voice suddenly quiet. Something flickered in his eyes. Not regret for his actions, I realized, but regret for their consequences. Are you filing for divorce? The papers will be delivered to you tomorrow, I confirmed. My lawyer suggested giving you time to secure legal representation of your own first. How considerate, he muttered bitterly. More consideration than you showed me when you were planning your exit strategy, I replied evenly. The difference is, I'm doing this legally and above board. Olivia, who had been increasingly shrinking into herself as the confrontation unfolded, suddenly stood. I should go. This is a family matter. Sit down, Olivia, I said, my tone leaving no room for argument. You became part of this family matter when you began sleeping with my husband and helping him spend my money. She sank back into her chair, face burning with humiliation. I felt a twinge of sympathy, not for her role in the affair, which had been fully informed and voluntary, but for her position now as collateral damage in James's implosion. I'm sorry, she whispered, addressing not just me but everyone at the table. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. How was it supposed to happen? My mother asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. Helen Mitchell had dedicated her career to understanding human behavior, and even now, her professional interest seemed piqued by the psychology of the situation. James said. Olivia hesitated, glancing at him. He said you'd already grown apart, that you were both staying together, for appearances, but living separate lives. He said once the house was finished, he would tell you he wanted a divorce, and you'd probably be relieved. A strangled sound came from my throat, not quite a laugh, not quite a sob. The audacity of his fiction was almost impressive. And you believed that? Despite seeing us together at company events, family gatherings, dinner parties, always seeming perfectly content? He said you were an excellent actress, Olivia admitted, not meeting my eyes. That you cared deeply about maintaining your perfect image. Projecting much, James? Daniel muttered, earning a sharp look from our mother. When did you realize the truth? I asked Olivia, genuinely curious. There must have been a moment when you suspected he was lying. She twisted her napkin in her lap. Last month, I found some anniversary cards in his car, ones you'd written to him. They didn't sound like someone who'd emotionally checked out of her marriage. I nodded, remembering those cards. For our last anniversary, I'd written about our future together, the family we hoped to start, the lifetime of memories we would create in our new home. Words from a woman fully invested in her marriage, not one staying together for appearances. And yet you continued the affair, I observed. He promised he would end things with you properly, she said, voice small. That he'd been looking for the right moment. The right moment being after you'd both moved into my house, using my money? I clarified. Olivia had no response to that, her silence damning. I trusted you, I told her, the professional calm I'd maintained finally cracking slightly. I recommended you for the Westridge project. I invited you to my home for dinner parties. I helped you secure your promotion last year. I know, she whispered. I'm so sorry, Elaine. Sorry you did it, or sorry you got caught. My brother's wife, Rachel, spoke for the first time, her voice sharp with disapproval. She and I had grown close over the years, sharing career advice and supporting each other in a corporate world that still presented unique challenges to ambitious women. Olivia didn't answer, which was answer enough. "I think," my father said, rising from his seat with the authority of decades in academia, "that we've had enough drama for one afternoon. This was meant to be a celebration, not a tribunal." He looked at James and Olivia with thinly veiled contempt. "I believe you two should leave." James stood slowly, gathering whatever dignity he could muster. "You haven't heard my side of the story." "Your bank statements told your side quite eloquently," my father replied coldly, "as did the documentation my daughter provided." For a moment, James looked as though he might argue further, but something in my father's expression stopped him. He turned to me instead. "This isn't over, Elaine. You've humiliated me in front of our entire family." "No, James," I corrected. "Him. You humiliated yourself. I simply provided the audience." He flinched as if I'd struck him. In all our years together, through disagreements and occasional arguments, I had never spoken to him with such direct brutality. The Elaine he knew, the accommodating, conflict-avoidant wife who smoothed over awkward situations and made excuses for his absences, had vanished, replaced by someone he didn't recognize. "Let's go," he muttered to Olivia, who rose shakily from her chair. "One more thing," I said, reaching into my purse one final time. I extracted a small velvet jewelry box and placed it on the table. "Your grandmother's sapphire earrings, the ones you gave me for our first anniversary, claiming they were a family heirloom meant for your wife." I opened the box, revealing the stunning blue stones set in antique silver. Imagine my surprise when I found the receipt while going through our financial records. "You bought them 2 days before our anniversary, from Olivia's father's jewelry store," Margaret gasped. "You told us those were my mother's earrings." "Another lie," I confirmed, "but a revealing one. Even 3 years ago, James was spinning elaborate fictions." I pushed the jewelry box toward Margaret. "These rightfully belong to your family, or at least the story of them does. I'd like you to have them." This final gesture seemed to break something in James. The careful facade of controlled indignation crumbled, revealing raw, ugly anger beneath. "You've been planning this for weeks," he accused, "setting me up for public humiliation. This isn't about justice. It's about revenge." "Perhaps," I acknowledged, "though I prefer to think of it as consequences. Natural, logical consequences for choices you made fully aware of their potential costs." I met his gaze steadily. "You gambled with our future, James. You bet that I wouldn't discover your betrayal until after you'd secured what you wanted. You lost." He held my gaze for a long moment, perhaps searching for some flicker of the woman he'd married. The one who might still be persuaded, manipulated, or charmed into forgiveness. Finding none, he finally turned away. "This isn't the end," he said again, but the threat sounded hollow even to my ears. "Actually, it is," I replied with finality. "Goodbye, James." I watched as he and Olivia made their way through the garden, past shocked guests pretending not to stare, beneath the wisteria-covered arbor where James and I had once posed for engagement photos, and finally out of sight around the corner of my childhood home. An uncomfortable silence descended over the table. The catering staff, who had been maintaining a respectful distance during the confrontation, now approached hesitantly with the main course. My mother, ever gracious, nodded for them to proceed. "Well," my father said, attempting to reclaim some normalcy. "I suppose this wasn't quite the retirement celebration we had planned." A ripple of nervous laughter broke the tension. Daniel raised his wine glass. "To Dad's retirement," he said firmly. "And to my sister, who just demonstrated why she's the financial genius in the family." "Daniel," my mother admonished, though a small smile played at her lips. "No, he's right," William Wilson spoke up, his voice gruff with emotion. "Elaine, we had no idea what James was doing. If we'd known—" "You couldn't have known," I assured him, feeling a surge of sympathy for my in-laws. They were casualties. In this, too, their image of their son forever altered by today's revelations. James was careful to compartmentalize his life. It's what made him successful in business, and apparently in deception as well. Margaret dabbed at her eyes with a linen napkin. "I don't know what to say. I'm so ashamed." "You have nothing to be ashamed of," I told her firmly. "James made his choices. They reflect on him, not on you." "Will you be all right?" she asked, maternal concern overriding family loyalty in this moment. "Financially, I mean. If he's taken so much—" "I'll be fine," I assured her. "Once I became suspicious, I took steps to protect our most significant assets. The damage is substantial, but not catastrophic." "And emotionally?" my mother asked quietly. That question was harder to answer honestly. The cold, methodical focus that had carried me through the past 3 weeks had served its purpose, allowing me to execute my plan with precision. But now, watching my husband walk away for the last time, I felt the first tremors of what would surely become a seismic emotional aftershock. "I'll be fine there too," I said, with more confidence than I felt. "Eventually." "You will," Rachel asserted, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "And you have all of us." I looked around at the faces of my family, my parents, my brother and his wife, even my former in-laws who seemed shell-shocked, but firmly in my corner. The tableau was missing 2 people who should have been there, but their absence was a wound that would heal cleaner than their duplicitous presence. "Thank you," I said simply, "for believing me, for being here." "Always," my father replied. "Now, perhaps we should try to salvage something of this celebration." We made a valiant effort. The excellent food was consumed, wine was poured, and conversation gradually shifted to safer topics. My father's colleagues shared amusing anecdotes from his teaching career, successfully drawing laughter from the assembled guests. To a casual observer, it might have appeared that the dramatic interlude had been forgotten. But I felt the weight of concerned glances, the careful way people phrased questions to avoid touching on raw subjects, the protective circle my family had instinctively formed around me. Their love was tangible and sustaining, but it couldn't erase the reality that at 34, I was facing a future entirely different from the one I'd envisioned. As the afternoon waned and guests began to depart, I found myself drawn to the old oak tree at the edge of the garden. Its massive trunk and spreading branches had witnessed my childhood games, teenage confidences, and now the dissolution of my marriage. I pressed my palm against its rough bark, drawing strength from its enduring presence. "This wasn't how I imagined spending Dad's retirement party," Daniel said, joining me beneath the dappled shade. Though I have to say, as family drama goes, it was impressively executed. I smiled despite myself. Not exactly the legacy I was hoping to create. "Are you kidding? You'll be family legend after this. Future generations will speak in hushed tones about the day Aunt Elaine systematically dismantled Uncle James's entire life in the middle of Sunday dinner." He bumped my shoulder gently with his. "Seriously, though, I'm proud of you." "For publicly humiliating my husband and his mistress?" "For refusing to be a victim," he corrected. "For using that terrifying brain of yours to protect yourself instead of falling apart. Though," he added, studying my face, "it would be completely understandable if you wanted to fall apart a little now. The audience has left." The simple permission in his words unlocked something in my chest. The first sob caught me by surprise. A harsh, broken sound that seemed to come from someone else. Then another, and another, until I was weeping in my brother's arms, great heaving sobs that bent me double with their force. Daniel held me silently, one hand making soothing circles on my back the way he had when we were children and I'd fallen from the treehouse or scraped my knee on the sidewalk. Some hurts could only be endured, not fixed, and he'd always understood the difference. I loved him, I managed between sobs. God, I loved him so much. I know, Daniel murmured. That's what makes it so awful. Was I blind? Did I miss something essential that would have told me who he really was? No, he said firmly. James showed everyone exactly what he wanted them to see, even me, and I'm naturally suspicious of anyone who wears pocket squares. That startled a watery laugh from me. He did love his pocket squares. Pretentious as hell, Daniel agreed, smiling. But seriously, Elaine, this isn't on you. Some people are just skilled at compartmentalizing their lives. James had us all fooled. I straightened, wiping my eyes with the back of my hand. Not all of us, apparently. Natalie knew. Daniel's expression darkened. Yeah, that's a separate betrayal to process. But right now, focus on yourself. What do you need? Want me to stay with you tonight? Or you could come to our place. The offer was tempting. The thought of returning to the modern townhouse where James and I had lived for the past 3 years, now emptied of his belongings but still haunted by his presence, made my stomach clench. But I knew avoidance would only delay the inevitable confrontation with my new reality. I need to go home, I said. Begin the process of reclaiming my space. But thank you. At least let me drive you. You shouldn't be alone right away. Actually, I admitted, Sophia is meeting me there. She helped coordinate the moving company this morning, and she's bringing wine and Chinese food. Daniel nodded, approvingly. Good. And tomorrow? I took a deep breath, mentally reviewing the list I'd prepared. Tomorrow I meet with the lawyer to finalize the divorce filing. Then I have a meeting with my financial advisor to restructure my investments. Post James. And I need to contact HR about removing him from my health insurance and updating my emergency contacts. All very practical, Daniel observed. But what about the emotional stuff? Are you seeing someone? A therapist, I mean. I nodded. First appointment is Wednesday. Sophia's therapist recommended her. Apparently she specializes in betrayal. Trauma. Good. He squeezed my shoulder. And when you're ready, not now, but eventually, we should talk about what happened with the house. The Pinecrest house. I tensed. What about it? You're not seriously planning to live there, are you? After everything that's happened? The question caught me off guard. In the fog of discovery and planning, I hadn't thought beyond securing the property and preventing James from sharing it with Olivia. The house itself, a modern architectural statement with floor-to-ceiling windows, custom finishes, and panoramic views of the conservation area, had been selected for its investment potential as much as its livability. James and I had spent countless hours poring over floor plans, selecting materials, and visualizing our future within its walls. Now those walls seemed contaminated by betrayal, every design choice potentially influenced by Olivia's input rather than my own preferences. I don't know, I admitted. I hadn't thought that far ahead. You don't have to decide now, Daniel assured me. But remember, it's just a house. Your victory was keeping it out of their hands, not necessarily living in it yourself. I nodded, grateful for his perspective. The house, like my marriage, represented a future that no longer existed. Whether I chose to reclaim and repurpose it or let it go entirely was a decision for another day. Elaine? My mother's voice called from the patio. Are you ready to go, sweetheart? I turned toward her voice, seeing both my parents standing, together, concern evident in their postures even at a distance. They had weathered their own storms in 40 years of marriage, though nothing quite like the tempest that had swept through today's celebration. Coming, Mom, I called back, then turned to Daniel. Thank you for everything. That's what big brothers are for, he said simply, beating up playground bullies and supporting sisters through catastrophic marriage implosions. I smiled despite myself. I'm going to be okay, aren't I? More than okay, he affirmed. You're going to be magnificent. The best revenge isn't just living well, it's thriving. As we walked back toward our parents, the late afternoon sun gilded the garden. In honeyed light, the remnants of the party, scattered napkins, half-empty glasses, abandoned conversation groups, would be cleaned up and packed away, just as I would need to sort through the wreckage of my marriage and decide what to preserve and what to discard. The process would be painful, messy, and undoubtedly longer than I wanted. But looking at my family waiting for me, I felt the first fragile tendrils of something that might eventually grow into hope. Not for reconciliation, that door had closed permanently today, but for reconstruction. For a future built on a foundation of my own design, unburdened by deception. A future that, for the first time in years, belonged entirely to me. The townhouse felt different when I returned that evening. Emptier, certainly, with James's belongings removed, but somehow fuller with possibility. Sophia was waiting on the front steps, 2 large bags of takeout from Golden Dragon beside her, a bottle of expensive Merlot tucked under her arm. "Well?" she asked, rising as I approached. "How did Operation Public Humiliation go?" I couldn't help but smile at her directness. Sophia Ramirez had been my closest friend since our college days, the person who saw through my careful composure to the vulnerabilities beneath. In the 3 weeks since discovering James's betrayal, she had been my confidant, strategist, and occasional voice of reason when my plans veered toward the excessively vindictive. "It went exactly as planned," I admitted, unlocking the front door. "Though I'm not sure public humiliation was my primary goal." "Of course it was," Sophia countered, following me inside. "Along with financial security and not letting that bastard steal your house. But don't pretend you didn't want to see the look on his face when you dropped that bomb at your dad's party." I couldn't argue with that. The memory of James's expression when he realized the depth of my knowledge and the thoroughness of my countermeasures would likely sustain me through many difficult days ahead. The townhouse's open floor plan, once a selling point for its modern aesthetic and entertainment potential, now felt exposed and vulnerable. Without James's collection of architectural books and pretentious art pieces, the built-in shelves looked bare, the walls uncommitted. The space reflected my current state, stripped of its former identity but not yet redefined. "The movers got everything?" I asked, setting my purse on the kitchen island that had hosted countless dinner parties and casual brunches with friends who would now feel compelled to choose sides. Sophia nodded, uncorking the wine with practiced efficiency. "Every last monogrammed dress shirt and leather-bound notebook, though I made them leave anything I thought might be jointly owned or sentimental to you." She gestured toward the hall closet. "There's a box in there with photos and stuff I wasn't sure about." "Thank you." I accepted the generously poured glass of wine she offered. "For everything. I couldn't have managed today without knowing this part was handled." "Please," Sophia waved away my gratitude. "After what you did for me during the Peterson divorce, I owed you at least 3 covert household operations." As a divorce attorney specializing in high-asset separations, Sophia had seen the worst of marital dissolution. Her pragmatic advice had been invaluable in preparing my strategy. We settled on the living room sofa with our wine in containers, of sesame chicken and vegetable lo mein, the normality of the ritual at odds with the exceptional circumstances. "So," Sophia prompted, twirling noodles around her fork, "walk me through it. Don't spare any details." I recounted the afternoon's events, James's arrival with Olivia, the gradual building of tension throughout the meal, the strategic revelation of evidence, and finally, their ignominious departure under my father's stern dismissal. "God, I wish I could have seen it," Sophia sighed when I finished, Especially Margaret's face when you handed her those earrings. That was a particularly inspired touch. It wasn't about inspiration, I admitted. I genuinely wanted her to have them. They're beautiful pieces, and the fact that James lied about their provenance says more about him than their actual origin. Sophia studied me over the rim of her wine glass. You're being remarkably generous toward his family, considering the circumstances. They're victims, too, in their way, I said. Margaret and William didn't raise their son to be unfaithful or deceitful. Finding out who he really is, that's its own kind of loss. And Natalie? Miss, I saw them together but didn't tell you? I sighed, the hurt of that particular betrayal still fresh. That's more complicated. I understand family loyalty, but she should have told you, Sophia finished firmly. There's loyalty, and then there's enabling someone to hurt others. She crossed that line. We ate in silence for a moment, the weight of the day settling around us like dust after an explosion. Finally, Sophia set down her container and fixed me with her attorney's gaze, the one she used to assess whether clients were withholding information. How are you really? Elaine? Not the financial advisor who outmaneuvered her cheating husband. Not the poised daughter putting on a brave face for her family. You, the woman who woke up 3 weeks ago and discovered her life was built on quicksand. The question penetrated the armor I'd been maintaining since the moment I found those messages on James's tablet. My hand trembled slightly as I set down my wine glass. I don't know, I admitted, the words barely audible. I've been so focused on what to do that I haven't really processed how I feel. Angry, obviously. Betrayed. Humiliated. I paused, considering emotions I hadn't allowed myself to fully acknowledge. Terrified. Of what? Sophia prompted gently. Of starting over at 34. Of trusting anyone again. Of looking back and realizing our entire relationship was a calculation on his part. The fears tumbled out, gaining momentum. What if there were signs all along that I missed? What if this is just who James always was, and I was too infatuated to see it? What does that say about my judgment? It says you're human, Sophia replied without hesitation. Even the most intuitive, observant people can be deceived by someone determined to present a false front, especially when that person is someone they love and trust implicitly. But I'm a financial advisor, I protested. I literally get paid to spot discrepancies and evaluate risk. How did I miss this? Because you weren't evaluating your husband. Like a financial portfolio, Sophia pointed out. That's not how love works. We don't apply the same analytical skills to our personal relationships that we do to our professional lives. I recognized the wisdom in her words, though they did little to ease the hollow feeling that had taken residence in my chest since discovering James's betrayal. The professional part of me had responded to the crisis with methodical problem-solving. The emotional part remained in shock, cycling between disbelief, rage, and profound sadness. I keep thinking about the future we planned, I confessed. The family we talked about starting once the house was finished. Was any of that real for him? Or was he just buying time until he could leave? Sophia reached across the sofa to squeeze my hand. I don't know, Elaine. And the terrible truth is, you may never know exactly when or how or why James changed. But that uncertainty doesn't invalidate the life you built or the person you are. I feel like such a fool, I whispered, voicing the thought that had haunted me most persistently. Everyone will be talking about this. How successful, competent Elaine Wilson didn't even realize her husband was planning to leave her for her colleague. For about 5 minutes, Sophia agreed pragmatically. Then they'll move on to the next scandal. But what they'll remember long-term is how you handled it, with dignity, intelligence, and a healthy dose of well-deserved vengeance. I smiled, despite myself. You make it sound admirable rather than petty. It's both, she shrugged. And that's okay. You're entitled to your righteous anger, Elaine. You earned it. We finished our dinner and opened a second bottle of wine, moving gradually from the heavy emotional territory to more practical concerns, changing passwords, notifying the bank of new account structures, updating my emergency contacts, the 1,000 small administrative tasks that divorce necessitates. Have you thought about what you'll do about work? Sophia asked eventually. Considering Olivia is your colleague? The question had been lurking in the background of my planning. Riverside Financial had been my professional home for 7 years, a place where I'd built my reputation and client base carefully and deliberately. The thought of leaving felt like conceding yet another loss to James's betrayal. I'm not resigning, I said firmly. I was there first. I've got seniority, and frankly, I'm more valuable to the firm. That's my girl, Sophia approved. Make her squirm, though it might get awkward. There's a satellite office opening in the West Ridge development next month, I explained. I've already spoken to Douglas about transferring my practice there. He's been wanting someone with my client roster to anchor the new location. Always 3 steps ahead, Sophia mused. James never stood a chance, did he? He had every chance, I corrected her. He chose deception instead of honesty, betrayal instead of loyalty. Those choices have consequences. By midnight, Sophia had helped me remove the last visible traces of James from the main living areas. We'd rearranged furniture, repositioned art, and even ordered new bedding for what had been our shared bedroom, but would now be exclusively mine. The physical transformation of the space paralleled the internal restructuring I was undertaking, painful but necessary. Stay tonight, I urged as she gathered her purse and keys. It's late, and you've had wine. I'm fine, she assured me. And you need this first night alone. It's part of the process. I knew she was right, though the thought of rattling around the townhouse by myself filled me with trepidation. The emptiness would force me to confront emotions I'd been holding, at bay through action and planning. Call me if you need anything, Sophia said, embracing me tightly at the door. Anything at all, anytime. And remember, this feeling isn't permanent. It's just right now. After she left, I moved through the townhouse methodically, checking locks, adjusting thermostats, completing the nightly routine that had once been shared but now fell solely to me. In the master bathroom, I paused before the double vanity, staring at the empty space where James's electric razor, expensive skincare products, and monogrammed towel had once resided. The silence of the house pressed against my ears, broken only by the soft whir of the central air conditioning and the distant hum of traffic on the main road. Without James's presence, his large personality, his constant motion, his endless stream of ideas and opinions, the space felt both eerily quiet and strangely peaceful. I slept fitfully that first night alone, drifting between consciousness and troubled dreams, where James and Olivia laughed at my naivete, while lounging in a house that looked suspiciously like the Pinecrest property. I woke before dawn, gritty-eyed, and exhausted but determined to face the day with the same composure I'd maintained throughout the confrontation. My morning routine, once calibrated to accommodate James's preferences and schedule, now belonged entirely to me. I lingered over coffee on the balcony, watching the neighborhood come alive as the sun rose. No need to rush breakfast or keep the coffee pot from making that gurgling noise that annoyed James. No careful selection of clothes based on who he might be meeting that day, or which colors he thought flattered me best. Small freedoms, but significant ones. By 9, I was dressed, in a tailored navy suit that projected exactly the image I wanted for my meeting with the lawyer: competent, composed, formidable. The woman who stared back from the mirror looked like someone who knew exactly what she was doing, someone not to be underestimated. I held on to that image as I gathered the final documents for the divorce filing. Sophia had recommended Catherine, Montgomery, a partner at Hamilton, Montgomery and Reed, who specialized in high-conflict divorces involving financial misconduct. I'd met with her initially to understand my options, then again to develop our strategy once I'd gathered sufficient evidence of James's activities. "The documentation you've compiled is exceptional," Catherine had remarked during our last consultation. "Most clients come to me with suspicions and hurt feelings. You've brought me a complete case." Her office occupied the 12th floor of the Oak Ridge Financial Center, its corner windows offering panoramic views of downtown and the river beyond. The reception area conveyed exactly the impression a high-end divorce attorney would want: tasteful but intimidating, with abstract art that suggested conflict and resolution, comfortable seating that nevertheless discouraged prolonged waiting. "Elaine," Catherine greeted me, emerging from her office in a crimson suit that contrasted dramatically with her silver bob. At 62, she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had seen every possible variation of marital dissolution and feared none of them. "Right on time. Come in." I followed her into the spacious office, taking the offered seat. Across from her imposing desk, a conference table occupied one corner, covered with neatly arranged folders that I recognized as my case files. "How did the confrontation go?" Catherine asked, adjusting her reading glasses as she opened the YSO topmost folder. "As expected," I replied. "Initial denial, followed by anger, culminating in threats that the matter isn't over." Catherine's mouth quirked in a knowing smile. "They always say that. Rarely does it amount to anything substantive." She removed several documents from the folder. "I've completed the divorce petition based on the evidence you provided. Once you've reviewed and signed, we can file today." I accepted the papers, scanning the formal legal language that would dissolve 7 years of relationship, 4 years of marriage, and 3 of dating before that. The clinical terminology: irreconcilable differences, financial misconduct, breach of fiduciary duty, seemed inadequate to describe the magnitude of James's betrayal, yet perhaps more dignified than "he planned to abandon me for my colleague after draining our savings." "Everything appears in order," I confirmed, signing where indicated. "Excellent. Now, about the house," Catherine continued. "The Pinecrest property. While I'm confident your sole ownership will stand up to any challenge, we should prepare for James to contest it, possibly claiming he was misled about the nature of the documents he signed." "I anticipated that," I said, retrieving a flash drive from my purse. The closing attorney recorded the signing session as standard practice for their firm. James clearly acknowledged receiving copies of all documents in advance. He just didn't bother to read them before signing. Catherine's eyebrows rose appreciatively. "You continue to impress, Elaine. Most of my clients are reactive. You've been remarkably proactive." "I'm a financial advisor," I reminded her. "Risk management is quite literally my job." "Indeed," she nodded. "Well, this certainly strengthens our position. I've also prepared a temporary restraining order regarding financial matters, preventing James from accessing any joint accounts or credit lines during the pendency of the divorce." "Already handled," I assured her. "I've frozen our joint accounts and removed him from all credit cards except one with a minimal limit that I'm monitoring daily. I left exactly half the balance of our joint checking account in place for his immediate expenses." Catherine removed her glasses, regarding me with newfound respect. "You know, if you ever tire of financial advising, you'd make an excellent divorce attorney." I smiled thinly. "I prefer helping people build wealth, not divide it." "Fair enough." She gathered the signed papers, tapping them into a neat stack. "My assistant will file these today. James should be served within 48 hours. Once that happens, the temporary orders take effect immediately. Has he retained counsel yet?" "Not that I'm aware of. Though if he follows predictable patterns, he'll go to Martin Reynolds. They play racquetball together at the athletic club." Catherine nodded, making a note. "Reynolds is aggressive, but not particularly creative. I've faced him dozens of times." She looked up, her expression softening slightly. Elaine, you've done everything right from a legal and financial perspective, but I feel compelled to ask, how are you managing emotionally? The question caught me off guard, similar to Sophia's inquiry the night before, but somehow more unsettling coming from this formidable professional woman. I hesitated, balancing honesty against the composed image I was determined to maintain. I'm focusing on practical matters for now, I finally said. The emotional fallout. I'm addressing that separately. Good, Catherine said. Too many. Clients let their emotions drive their decision-making during divorce. It almost always leads to poor outcomes. She rose, signaling the end of our meeting. I'll contact you as soon as James is served and we receive any response from his counsel. I left the law office with a strange sense of accomplishment mingled with unreality. The legal machinery that would dismantle my marriage was now in motion, proceeding with the same methodical precision I'd applied to uncovering James's betrayal. Yet despite the professional satisfaction of executing a well-crafted plan, an undercurrent of grief pulsed beneath my composed exterior. 7 years of shared history, birthdays, holidays, career milestones, quiet Sunday mornings, ambitious plans for the future, all ending not with the gradual fading of love or even a dramatic explosive argument, but with the cold revelation of calculated deception. There would be no opportunity for closure, no chance to understand fully what had gone wrong or when James had decided our marriage was disposable. My next appointment took me across town to the offices of Meridian Wealth Management, where my personal financial advisor Martin Chen had squeezed me into his schedule after receiving my urgent email the previous day. Unlike my relationship with Catherine, which was newly formed for this specific crisis, Martin had been guiding my investments since my first job out of graduate school. Elaine, he greeted me, rising from behind his desk with evident concern. I was surprised by your message. Urgent portfolio restructuring isn't a phrase I typically associate with your long-term approach. I closed his office door before responding. My circumstances have changed significantly, Martin. I'm divorcing James. To his credit, Martin showed only momentary surprise before his professional demeanor reasserted itself. I see. Please, sit down and tell me what you need. For the next hour, we methodically reviewed my financial position, investments, retirement accounts, insurance policies, real estate holdings. I had already removed James as beneficiary from most accounts, but several required additional documentation that Martin helped me prepare. The Pinecrest property, Martin noted, reviewing the mortgage details. That's the development James has been working on, correct? Yes. I explained the unusual circumstances of the purchase and my sole ownership of the property. Martin whistled, softly. That was remarkably prescient of you. Not prescience, I corrected. Just caution. James became increasingly secretive about finances over the past year. I responded by protecting myself. Well, it puts you in a strong position now, Martin observed. Though I'm concerned about your liquidity with so much capital tied up in that property. If you're planning to remain there after the divorce, I haven't decided, I admitted. I secured it primarily to prevent James from taking it, not because I'm certain I want to live there. Martin nodded thoughtfully. That's understandable. We should create a contingency plan for both scenarios, keeping the property or selling it post-divorce. Either way, you'll need to rebuild your emergency fund after the withdrawals James made. We spent another 30 minutes outlining investment, strategies, and cash flow projections for my new financial reality. By the end of the meeting, I had a clear 3-phase plan for stabilizing my finances, rebuilding savings, and eventually returning to the growth trajectory I'd been on before. James's betrayal derailed my carefully constructed financial future. Thank you, Martin, I said as our meeting concluded. Having concrete numbers and timelines makes this all feel more manageable. That's why we do the planning, he replied with a gentle smile. to create certainty within uncertainty. He hesitated, then added, Elaine, I hope this doesn't sound presumptuous, but I've worked with many clients through divorce. The financial aspect is crucial, of course, but don't neglect the personal rebuilding. There's a tendency, especially among financially savvy people, to focus exclusively on the practical while deferring the emotional work. It was the third time in 24 hours that someone had attempted to steer me toward acknowledging my feelings, rather than focusing solely on practical matters. Perhaps the universe was sending a message. I'm seeing a therapist tomorrow, I assured him, and I have good support from family and friends. Excellent. He appeared genuinely relieved. Then I'll focus on the numbers and leave the rest to the appropriate experts. By early afternoon, I had completed most of the administrative tasks on my list, updating my emergency contacts, securing important documents, changing passwords for every account James and I had shared. Each step methodically erased his access to the infrastructure of my life, severing connections that had once seemed permanent and essential. The last stop on my post-confrontation agenda was Riverside Financial Group, where I needed to meet with human resources about insurance changes and speak with the managing partner about my planned transfer to the Westridge office. I had taken 2 personal days following the confrontation, anticipating the administrative whirlwind of initiating divorce, but I knew rumors would already be circulating. Financial services was a small world in Oak Ridge, and news of James Wilson's public disgrace would travel quickly. The firm occupied 5 floors of a gleaming glass tower downtown, its reception area designed to convey both prosperity and discretion, qualities our wealthy clients valued above all else. As I stepped off the elevator, I straightened my shoulders and arranged my features into the professional mask I'd perfected over years of client meetings during personal crises. Whatever chaos my private life contained, my professional persona would remain unflappable. Elaine, Douglas Moore, the managing partner, emerged from the conference room as I passed. I didn't expect to see you today. Everything all right? His concerned expression suggested he'd already heard something, though perhaps not the full story. I had some HR matters to address, I replied smoothly. And I wanted to confirm details about the Westridge office transition. Do you have a few minutes? Of course. He gestured toward his corner office. Come in. Douglas had been my mentor since I joined the firm as a junior advisor, recognizing my analytical skills and client rapport as assets worth developing. At 58, he had built Riverside Financial from a small independent practice to one of the region's most respected wealth management firms. His opinion mattered to me professionally, but also personally, making this conversation particularly challenging. I'll be direct, I said once his office door closed behind us. I'm divorcing James. The situation has become untenable, and it involves another staff member, Olivia Carter. Douglas's expression shifted from concern to shock. Olivia? From the Westridge team? Yes, she and James have been involved for some time. I discovered the relationship several weeks ago, along with evidence that James had been misappropriating joint funds to finance their future together. I delivered the information clinically, as if discussing an underperforming investment rather than the collapse of my personal life. Douglas listened without interruption, his expression growing increasingly grave. Elaine, I don't know what to say. This is unexpected. James always seemed so devoted to you. Appearances can be deceiving, I replied, the understatement of the century. I'm telling you this not to seek sympathy or to damage Olivia's position here, but because it directly impacts my request to transfer to the Westridge office. Working in proximity to her would be professionally challenging for us both. Douglas nodded slowly, processing the implications. I understand completely. The Westridge transfer is yours, effective immediately if that's what you need. We can accelerate the timeline we discussed last month. Thank you. I appreciate your flexibility. I hesitated, then added, I should note that my client relationships and service standards won't be affected by these personal circumstances. I've taken measures to ensure complete separation between my professional and personal situations. I never doubted that for a moment, Douglas assured me. Your professionalism has always been exemplary, Elaine. That's why you're precisely who we need to establish our presence in Westridge. He paused, clearly weighing his next words carefully. Regarding Olivia, I'm not asking for any action against her, I interjected, anticipating his concern. What happened in my marriage isn't ultimately Riverside's responsibility to address. The transfer will create sufficient distance for both of us to continue our work without daily interaction. Relief flickered across Douglas's face. Workplace romances gone wrong created potential liability issues that managing partners dreaded, especially in a client-facing industry where trust and stability were paramount. That's very measured of you, he said finally. But if the situation changes or becomes unworkable, please come to me immediately. Your well-being and continued success here are priorities for me personally and for the firm. Our conversation shifted to the practical details of the transfer: timeline, client notifications, office space requirements. By the time I left Douglas's office, the foundation for my professional transition was solidly in place, another piece of my post-James future secured through careful planning and clear communication. As I crossed the office toward the elevator, a familiar voice called my name. I turned to find Ryan Cooper, James's closest friend at the firm and frequent enabler of his late nights at the office, approaching with an expression of forced casualness that immediately put me on alert. Elaine, hey, didn't expect to see you here today. Everything okay? His eyes didn't quite meet mine, focusing somewhere over my left shoulder. Everything's fine, Ryan, I replied coolly, just handling some administrative matters. He shifted, uncomfortably, adjusting his tie in a nervous gesture I recognized from client meetings when he was delivering disappointing performance news. Listen, about James. He called me this morning. He's pretty upset. I imagine he is, I interrupted. Finding out your embezzlement has been discovered and your exit strategy thwarted would be upsetting for anyone. Ryan blanched. Embezzlement? Come on, Elaine. That's a bit extreme. Is it? I stepped closer, lowering my voice to ensure our conversation remained private. You knew, didn't you, about James and Olivia? All those times you corroborated his stories about working late or weekend conferences. You were covering for him. The guilt in Ryan's expression confirmed my suspicion before he could formulate a denial. I felt a fresh wave of betrayal, not just from James and Olivia, but from this entire circle of supposed friends who had watched my marriage disintegrate while saying nothing. It wasn't my place to get involved, Ryan protested weakly. James is my friend, but so are you. I told him he was making a mistake. Save it, I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite the anger simmering beneath the surface. I'm not interested in your after-the-fact conscience. If James sent you to plead his case or gather intelligence, you can tell him all communication should go through our respective attorneys from now on. I turned to leave, unwilling to prolong the encounter, but Ryan caught my arm gently. Elaine? Wait! It's not like that. James is staying at my place right now. He's a mess. He said you emptied your house of his things without warning. Without warning? I repeated incredulously. Like he was planning to leave me without warning once the Pinecrest house was ready? After draining our savings for his future with Olivia? I shook off his hand. Ryan, whatever friendship we had is collateral damage in this situation. I suggest you maintain a professional distance going forward. The elevator arrived with a soft chime, offering escape from the increasingly uncomfortable conversation. As the doors closed between us, I caught a glimpse of Ryan's expression, a mixture of guilt, concern, and something that might have been admiration. The complexity of other people's reactions to my situation was yet another aspect I hadn't fully anticipated in my meticulous planning. By the time I returned to the townhouse that evening, the adrenaline that had propelled me through the day's appointments was fading, leaving exhaustion in its wake. I kicked off my heels inside the door, a small act of liberation that James would have disapproved of. He'd always insisted shoes be properly placed in the entryway closet immediately upon entering. The house felt different in evening light, not just emptier with James's belongings gone, but somehow more authentic. I realized with a start that many design elements I'd attributed to our taste had actually been James's preferences imposed through subtle pressure. The sleek modern furniture that had always seemed slightly uncomfortable, the minimalist art that conveyed sophistication but little warmth, the cool color palette that photographed well but never quite felt like home. As I moved through the ET space with fresh eyes, I began mentally redecorating. Warmer colors, more personal touches, furniture selected for comfort rather than aesthetic impact. Perhaps this was the first step in reclaiming not just my financial independence, but my personal identity as well. The phone call came exactly 23 days after I'd served James with divorce papers. I was in my new office at the Westridge satellite location, reviewing portfolio adjustments for the Peterson account when his name appeared on my screen. For a moment, I simply stared at it, my finger hovering over the decline button. We hadn't spoken directly since the confrontation at my parents' garden party. All communication had flowed through our respective attorneys, his predictably being Martin Reynolds, just as I'd anticipated. Riverside Financial, Elaine Wilson speaking, I answered, my professional tone betraying nothing of the surge of adrenaline I felt at hearing his voice again. Elaine? James sounded different, subdued without the confident charm that had once been his signature. We need to talk. I believe our attorneys are handling all necessary communication, I replied evenly, turning to gaze out the floor-to-ceiling windows of my 12th floor office. The Westridge development sprawled below, its modern architecture a testament to prosperity and new beginnings, including my own. This isn't about the divorce, he said. It's about the house, the Pinecrest property. I tensed, prepared for another challenge to my ownership. Catherine had warned me that James might attempt various legal maneuvers to claim an interest in the property, despite the clear documentation establishing it as solely mine. What about it? I want to buy it from you, he said simply. Full. Market value, plus 10%. The request was so unexpected that for a moment I couldn't formulate a response. Of all the scenarios I'd anticipated, James attempting to purchase the house had never crossed my mind. Why? I finally managed. A heavy silence stretched between us before he answered. Because I designed it. Every beam, every angle, every wall. It's the best work I've ever done, and I can't stand the thought of someone else living in it. Or worse, you altering my vision. The raw honesty of his admission struck me more forcefully than any legal threat could have. This wasn't about Olivia anymore. She'd apparently been discarded as quickly as I had once complications arose. This was about James's ego, his professional pride, his sense of ownership over something he had created, but no longer controlled. I see, I said, keeping my voice neutral, while my mind raced through implications and possibilities. And how exactly would you finance this purchase? Considering your recent financial difficulties. Another pause, this one briefer. I've secured independent financing. The partners were impressed with the Pinecrest design. They've offered me a significant advancement against future project shares. So the very talent that had built our marriage was now being leveraged to extract himself from its ruins. There was a certain ironic symmetry to it. I'll need to think about it, I replied, unwilling to make such a significant decision during this unexpected conversation. My attorney will contact yours to discuss terms if I decide to consider the offer. Elaine? James's voice took on an edge of urgency. This doesn't have to be hostile. We were good together once. Can't we at least handle this one thing civilly directly? The audacity of his appeal to civility after his months of deception nearly provoked a laugh. Civility ended when you drained our joint savings and planned to abandon our marriage without warning, I reminded him. Now we communicate through legal representation. That's not hostility, James. It's protection. I ended the call before he could respond, setting down my phone with hands that trembled slightly despite my outward composure. The encounter had disrupted the careful equilibrium I'd been building, reopening questions I thought I'd resolved about the property and my future plans for it. My desk phone buzzed, my assistant Melissa letting me know my next appointment had arrived. With practiced discipline, I pushed thoughts of James and his unexpected offer to a compartment in my mind that could be examined later, in private. Send them in, I instructed, straightening the portfolio materials before me and assuming the professional demeanor my clients expected. The rest of the workday passed in a productive blur: client meetings, portfolio reviews, strategy sessions. With the Westridge team, the satellite office had been operational for just under 2 weeks, and already we were establishing a rhythm that felt both familiar and refreshingly different from the downtown headquarters. The smaller, more intimate setting allowed closer collaboration among the advisors, and the location in Oak Ridge's fastest-growing commercial district attracted precisely the upwardly mobile professional clientele the firm had hoped to capture. By 5:30, I was the last advisor remaining, using the quiet to finalize presentations for the next day's meetings. The sunset painted the western sky in dramatic orange and purple, casting the office in golden light that gradually faded, to the softer illumination of desk lamps and recessed lighting. This time of day had always been my most productive, the transitional hour when daytime bustle settled into evening contemplation. My phone chimed with a text message from Daniel. Family dinner at Mom and Dad's tonight, 7:30, no excuses accepted. Followed immediately by another. Mom's making her lasagna, the good kind with extra cheese. I smiled despite the fatigue settling over me. My family had been a constant presence since the confrontation, checking in daily, inviting me to dinners, stopping by the townhouse with thinly veiled excuses to ensure I wasn't drowning in solitude or self-pity. Their concern was touching, if occasionally smothering. I'll be there, I texted back, bringing wine. The family dinner ritual had taken on new significance in the weeks following my separation from James. No longer obligatory social gatherings. To maintain appearances of familial harmony, they had transformed into genuine sanctuaries, spaces where I could momentarily set aside the practical and professional concerns of rebuilding my life and simply exist as a daughter, a sister, and aunt to Daniel's children. I arrived at my parents' Victorian precisely at 7:30, bottle of Italian red in hand, to find the usual organized chaos of a Mitchell family gathering in full swing. My father was in his favorite armchair, 7-year-old nephew Ben on his lap, as they examined what appeared to be rock specimens from Ben's latest science project. My mother moved between kitchen and dining room with practiced efficiency, while Daniel and Rachel set the table amid good-natured bickering about the proper placement of water glasses. Aunt Elaine! 4-year-old Sophie spotted me first, abandoning her coloring book to launch herself into my arms with the unrestrained enthusiasm only preschoolers can muster. I lost a tooth! See? She opened her mouth wide, displaying the gap where her lower incisor had been. Wow! I exclaimed with appropriate amazement. Did the tooth fairy come? Yes! She left me $5, Sophie reported triumphantly. The domestic economy of tooth-to-cash exchange rates, having apparently experienced significant inflation since my childhood. That's a very generous fairy, I commented, making eye contact with Rachel over Sophie's head. My sister-in-law rolled, her eyes with a smile that acknowledged parental indulgence. Elaine, perfect timing, my mother called from the kitchen doorway. Can you help with the salad? And taste the dressing? I tried a new recipe. The familiar routine enveloped me like a well-worn sweater, comfortable, expected, reassuring, in its predictability. For the next hour, we moved through the choreography of family dinner, serving food, complimenting the chef, sharing anecdotes from our days, gently teasing each other about long-standing family jokes and foibles. It wasn't until the children had been excused to watch a movie in the den that the conversation shifted to more adult concerns. "How's the new office?" my father asked, refilling wine glasses around the table. "Westridge seems to be booming. Almost it's exceeding projections," I confirmed. "We've already onboarded 15 new clients since opening, and the development continues to attract exactly the demographic we're targeting. And it's far enough from downtown that you don't have to worry about uncomfortable encounters," Daniel added, the unspoken name of Olivia hanging in the air. I nodded, grateful as always for my family's tacit understanding of the emotional landmines scattered throughout my professional landscape. Distance has its advantages. "Speaking of distance," my mother began carefully, "Margaret Wilson called me today." The mention of James's mother immediately shifted the atmosphere around the table. While I'd maintained that his parents weren't responsible for his actions, the reality of maintaining relationships with in-laws during divorce was inevitably complicated, especially given the public nature of our separation. "Oh?" I kept my tone neutral. "How is she?" "Struggling," my mother admitted. "She asked about you, whether you're doing well. She seems genuinely concerned." "That's kind of her," I said, meaning it despite the awkwardness. Margaret had always treated me like a daughter, not just a daughter-in-law. The loss of that relationship was another casualty of James's betrayal that I hadn't fully processed. "She also mentioned," my mother continued even more carefully, "that James has been asking about the Pinecrest house, whether you might consider selling it to him." I set down my wine glass with deliberate control. "He called me directly about that today, actually." "He what?" Daniel's protective instincts flared immediately. "That violates the agreement to communicate through attorneys." "It does," I acknowledged. "Though technically he can claim it. Was a business inquiry rather than a divorce matter." "What did you tell him?" Rachel asked. "That I'd think about it and any communication would go through proper channels." I paused, considering whether to share the full complexity of my reaction to James's offer. My family had been unfailingly supportive, but they also held strong opinions about how I should proceed with the divorce, generally favoring approaches that maximized James's discomfort and minimized his claims to shared assets. "Are you actually considering it?" My father's question cut to the heart of the matter, his economist's mind likely already calculating the financial implications. "I don't know," I admitted, surprising myself with the candor. From a purely financial perspective, his offer is excellent. Market value plus 10% for a property that isn't even completed yet. In this economic climate, that's significant. "But it's not just about money," my mother observed quietly. "No," I agreed. "It's also about—" I struggled to articulate the conflicting emotions James's offer had stirred. "Principle, I suppose. About not letting him have what he wants after everything he's done." "Spite is a perfectly valid reason to make a financial decision," Daniel declared, raising his glass in a mock toast that earned him a reproving look from Rachel. "It's not spite exactly," I tried to explain. "It's more that selling him the house feels like conceding something, even if I profit financially." "Or," Rachel suggested gently, "perhaps keeping a house you never intended to live in alone is holding on to something that might be better released." My sister-in-law's insight cut closer to the truth than I'd been willing to acknowledge to myself. The Pinecrest house had been designed for the family James and I had planned to create together. Spacious rooms for children we'd discussed having, a home office suite for 2 professionals, entertaining spaces for the social life we'd cultivated as a couple. Even before discovering his betrayal, I'd experienced occasional doubts about whether the house truly reflected my personal tastes or merely James's architectural vision with my pragmatic adjustments. "You don't have to decide immediately," my father reminded me. "The property isn't going anywhere." "Actually, that's not entirely true," I corrected him. "The development has a completion deadline for the initial phase. If I'm going to sell, sooner would be better than later to avoid potential complications with the homeowners association and developer requirements." Always the practical one. My mother smiled, though her eyes remained concerned. "But Robert's right. You have time to consider what's best for you, not just financially but emotionally. This house represents more than just square footage and design elements." The conversation shifted to other topics: Ben's upcoming science fair, my father's post-retirement consulting work, Rachel's promotion at the security firm, but James's offer lingered in my thoughts throughout the evening. By the time I declined dessert and prepared to leave, pleading early client meetings the next morning, I had reached at least a tentative decision. "I'm going to have Catherine draft a conditional acceptance of James's offer," I told my family as we gathered in the front hall, "with significant stipulations that protect my interests and acknowledge the unusual circumstances." Daniel looked ready to object, but Rachel placed a restraining hand on his arm. "That sounds like a thoughtful approach," she said. "What kind of stipulations are you considering?" "Financial safeguards, primarily," I explained. "Verification of his funding source, substantial non-refundable deposit, accelerated closing timeline, and a personal one. I want a formal acknowledgement that I had sole legal right to the property, not for public disclosure, but for my own peace of mind. I need him to explicitly recognize that this is a purchase, not a reclamation of something that was rightfully his." My father nodded approvingly. "Protecting both your financial and emotional interests. Wise." "Are you sure about this, Elaine?" Daniel asked, his concern evident. "You fought so hard to keep that house from him." "I fought to keep him from taking it as part of his exit strategy with Olivia," I clarified. "That circumstance has changed. Now it's a business transaction that happens to benefit me financially while removing a complicated asset from my portfolio." "And removing a complicated emotional symbol from your life," my mother added perceptively. I smiled, acknowledging the truth in her observation. That too. The drive back to my townhouse gave me time to further consider the implications of my decision. Selling the Pinecrest property to James would certainly generate considerable profit, providing capital for a new investment more aligned with my current circumstances. It would also eliminate the constant reminder of our shared plans and his betrayal. Yet some part of me still resisted surrendering the house I'd legally secured through careful planning and quick action. Dr. Abernathy, the therapist I'd been seeing weekly since the separation, would likely identify this as an attachment not to the house itself, but to the victory it represented. Tangible proof that I'd outmaneuvered James when he'd attempted to deceive me. Letting go of the property might require letting go of that narrative as well, moving from righteous vindication toward something more complex and ultimately more healing. By the time I reached home, I'd composed a mental outline of the email I would send Catherine in the morning, authorizing her to draft a conditional acceptance of James's offer with the stipulations I'd described to my family. The decision felt right. A strategic retreat that would ultimately advance my true objectives of financial security and emotional recovery. The townhouse was dark when I entered, having left in too much of a hurry that morning to program the lighting system James had insisted on installing last year. I moved through familiar spaces by memory, and the ambient glow of streetlights through uncovered windows, not bothering to illuminate rooms I wouldn't use before bed. In the kitchen, I filled a glass with water and leaned against the counter, considering the empty space where James's pretentious espresso machine had once dominated the countertop. I'd never particularly liked the complicated device, preferring a simple French press for my morning coffee, but had accepted its presence as one of the many compromises that constituted married life. Now, with each passing day, I was rediscovering preferences and habits I'd gradually suppressed to accommodate James's stronger personality. Some were trivial, leaving shoes by the door, sleeping with the bedroom window cracked even in winter, using colorful coffee mugs instead of the precision-matched white set James had insisted upon. Others were more significant, reconnecting with friends he'd subtly discouraged, considering a professional certification program he'd dismissed as unnecessary, exploring mindfulness practices he'd characterized as New Age nonsense. The cumulative effect was both liberating and disorienting, like stepping out of a costume I'd worn so long I'd forgotten it wasn't my own skin. Who was Elaine Wilson without James? What did she truly want from her career, her home, her relationships? These questions occupied my quieter moments, pushing beyond the immediate practical concerns of divorce proceedings and financial reorganization. My phone chimed with an email notification, Catherine responding to a question I'd sent earlier, about division of retirement assets. Even at 9:30 p.m., my attorney remained diligently attentive to my case, a commitment that justified her considerable hourly rate. I scanned her response, noting with satisfaction her strategic approach to countering James's latest settlement proposal. Another notification followed immediately, this one from the security system at the Pinecrest property, alerting me to motion detected at the front entrance. I'd had cameras installed after securing sole ownership, a precaution Catherine had recommended given the contentious circumstances of the separation. I opened the alert, expecting to see a construction worker or property inspector making a late visit. Instead, the high-definition footage showed James standing on what would have been our front porch, staring up at the house with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. Not anger or resentment, but something more complex. Wistfulness, perhaps, or regret. He held what appeared to be architectural plans, occasionally glancing down at them before looking back at the partially completed structure. After several minutes, he refolded the plans and returned to his car, not the luxury sedan he'd driven. During our marriage, I noted, but a more modest vehicle that suggested his financial circumstances had indeed changed as dramatically as mine. The footage disturbed me more than I wanted to admit. Seeing James at the house, alone rather than with Olivia, studying his own designs with such evident longing, humanized him in a way that complicated my carefully constructed narrative of villainous betrayal. It reminded me that behind his deception and selfishness was a person with his own dreams and disappointments, his own version of our shared story. Dr. Abernathy had encouraged me to move toward this more nuanced understanding, suggesting that perpetuating a simplistic villain narrative ultimately impeded my own healing. "You don't have to forgive him," she'd said during our last session, "but recognizing his humanity, flawed and hurtful as it's been, allows you to release some of the anger that's binding you to this pain." I closed the security alert, deciding not to mention James's visit to Catherine. It violated no legal restrictions, represented no threat to the property, and ultimately changed nothing about my decision to sell him the house. If anything, it confirmed that his desire to purchase it stemmed from genuine attachment to his architectural creation, rather than some complicated scheme involving Olivia. As I prepared for bed, following my own preferred evening routine rather than the elaborate skincare regimen James had encouraged, I reflected on the strange new terrain I was navigating. For 7 years, my identity had been increasingly defined by my relationship with James, my choices subtly shaped by his preferences and expectations. Now I was rediscovering myself, not as the naive young woman I'd been before meeting him, but as someone tempered by experience, wiser about human nature, more protective of my autonomy. The following morning, I sent the authorized email to Catherine outlining my conditions for accepting James's offer on the Pinecrest property. Her response came within hours, approving my approach and promising to draft appropriate documents by the end of the week. With that decision made, I turned my attention fully to the day's professional responsibilities, finding satisfaction in the clear objectives and measurable outcomes of financial advising that provided such welcome contrast to the messy ambiguities of personal life. 3 weeks later, I stood in the spacious foyer of the Pinecrest house, surrounded by the soaring ceilings and dramatic sightlines of James's architectural vision. The property was nearly complete now, lacking only final fixtures and cosmetic finishes. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating spaces designed for a life I would never live. Catherine stood beside me, documents in hand for the final walkthrough before closing. James's attorney, Martin Reynolds, waited near the front entrance, engaged in quiet conversation with the closing agent from the title company. James himself maintained a respectful distance, examining a detail of the kitchen cabinetry with professional interest rather than approaching me directly. "Everything appears to be in order," Catherine murmured, reviewing the inspection report one final time. "The property condition is consistent with the stage of construction described in the purchase agreement, and all disclosures have been properly documented." I nodded, only half listening as I took a final tour of what might have been my home. Despite the pragmatic financial arguments that had ultimately convinced me to sell, standing in the physical space stirred complicated emotions. The master bedroom with its mountain views had been designed to capture morning light in precisely the way I preferred. The kitchen layout incorporated specific modifications I'd requested to accommodate my cooking habits. The library included custom shelving for my collection of financial history texts. Yet interwoven with these personal touches were elements I recognized as concessions to James's aesthetic. The ultra-modern fixtures I'd found cold but accepted to please him. The open-concept design that prioritized impression over intimacy. The elaborate home theater system I'd never wanted, but he'd insisted was essential for a house of this caliber. "Elaine?" Catherine's voice drew me back to the present moment. "They're ready for signatures if you are." I rejoined the group gathered around a makeshift table in what would have been the dining room. James looked up as I approached, his expression carefully neutral, but his eyes conveying something more complex. Relief, perhaps, or gratitude. "I've reviewed all documents," Martin announced with the brisk efficiency that had characterized all our interactions. "Everything is in order on our side." The closing agent, a middle-aged woman with the practiced pleasantness of someone who regularly witnesses major life transitions, distributed signature pages with color-coded tabs indicating where initials and full signatures were required. "Ms. Wilson, if you could start here." The process was methodical and anticlimactic. Signatures and initials, confirmations of identities, formal acknowledgments of terms. With each signed page, I transferred ownership of not just a physical property but a future that would never materialize. By the time I reached the final document, I felt a curious lightness, as if setting down a heavy object I'd been carrying for too long. "And that completes the transaction," the closing agent announced with professional cheer. "Congratulations, Mr. Wilson. Ms. Wilson, the wire transfer has been confirmed by your financial institution." With formal business concluded, an awkward moment ensued as the professionals gathered their materials and prepared to depart, leaving James and me momentarily alone in the echoing space of the foyer. I had no intention of engaging in personal conversation, having maintained strict professional boundaries throughout the transaction, but James stepped forward before I could make my exit. "Elaine," he began, his voice low enough that only I could hear. "Thank you. I know you could have refused to sell." I met his gaze directly, noting the subtle signs of strain that had appeared since our separation. New lines around his eyes, a certain hollowness in his cheeks that suggested weight loss. "It was a business decision," I replied evenly. "The offer made financial sense." "Still," he persisted, "I appreciate it. This house." He glanced around at his creation. "It means more to me than I can explain." "I understand that now," I acknowledged, surprising myself with the candor. "It's your vision, your design. You should be the one to complete it." A flicker of something like hope crossed his features. Does that mean? It means exactly what I said, I interrupted, not wanting him to misinterpret professional courtesy as personal softening. The house is now legally yours, as it should have been from the beginning if you'd been honest about your intentions. His expression closed slightly at the reminder of his deception. I never meant for things to unfold as they did. But they did unfold that way, James. Through choices you made deliberately, repeatedly, over months. I kept my voice level, not allowing emotion to color the observation. Actions have consequences. Some of those consequences can be mitigated, like your ability to purchase this house despite your initial plan to take it from me. Others are permanent. He nodded slowly, accepting the finality in my tone. For what it's worth, Olivia and I? He hesitated, apparently reconsidering whatever he'd been about to say. Well, that's not relevant anymore. So they had separated, as I'd suspected from his solitary visit to the property. I felt no satisfaction in this confirmation, only a weary recognition of patterns I'd observed in other divorces. The relationship that began in deception rarely survived the harsh light of reality once the excitement of forbidden connection faded. No, I agreed. It isn't relevant. Not to me, and not to this transaction. I extended my hand formally, concluding our business with the professional courtesy I would show any client. Goodbye, James. I wish you well with the house. He accepted, the handshake with visible surprise, perhaps having expected continued hostility rather than this detached civility. Thank you, Elaine. I wish you. He seemed to struggle for appropriate words. Happiness. Whatever that looks like for you now. Catherine appeared at my side, effectively ending the exchange. Ready? She asked, car keys already in hand. At my nod, she led the way toward the front entrance, maintaining the protective buffer she'd established throughout our professional relationship. As we walked away from the house, away from James, away from the future we'd planned within those walls, I experienced not the grief or anger I might have expected, but a profound sense of completion. The sale represented the final severing of practical entanglements between us, a clean financial break to match the emotional one I'd been working toward. How do you feel? Catherine asked as we reached her car, legal briefcase stowed safely in the back seat. I considered the question carefully before answering. Lighter, I said finally, like I've set down something I no longer need to carry. She nodded approvingly. That's the ideal outcome in these situations. Not victory or vengeance, but release. As a veteran of countless high-conflict divorces, Catherine understood better than most the psychological weight of protracted battles, overshared assets, and broken promises. The funds should be available in your account by end of day, she continued, shifting to practical matters as we drove away from Pinecrest. Have you decided how you'll allocate the proceeds? I had, in fact, spent considerable time with Martin Chen developing an investment strategy for the substantial sum the sale had generated. The plan balanced immediate needs, long-term security, and something I hadn't prioritized in years: personal fulfillment. Most will go into diversified investments, I explained. Some for retirement enhancement, some for more aggressive growth opportunities. I've also allocated funds for a down payment on a new property, something smaller in the historic district downtown. A wise distribution, Catherine approved. And the contingency acknowledgement? She referred to the unusual stipulation I'd insisted upon, James's formal written recognition that I had held sole legal ownership of the property and that his purchase represented a new acquisition rather than recovery of a shared asset. The document held no practical legal value, but had been important to me as a matter of principle. I'll keep it with my important papers, I said. It's unlikely I'll ever need it, but it matters that he acknowledged the truth. Catherine finished for me. That's not unusual or unreasonable, Elaine. documentation of truth has value beyond legal enforceability. As we navigated back toward downtown Oak Ridge, I gazed out the window at neighborhoods transitioning from the ultra-modern developments of Pinecrest to the established character of older districts. My thoughts turned to the small Victorian row house I'd toured the previous week, a historic property with original architectural details and a sun-filled garden room that had immediately felt more like home than the sleek modernity of the house I'd just sold. The row house needed considerable updating and lacked the impressive scale of the Pinecrest property, but its character resonated with aspects of myself I was rediscovering: appreciation for history and craftsmanship, desire for intimacy rather than ostentation, comfort with imperfection and the evidence of time's passage. "I'm making an offer on the Maple Street property," I told Catherine, the decision crystallizing as I spoke. The full asking price, with flexibility on timing to accommodate the current owner's needs. She glanced at me with evident approval. "The Victorian? It suits you far better than that glass and concrete monument to modernity ever would have." I smiled, appreciating her candor. "I think so too. It's a place I can imagine growing into, not one I'll need to grow to accommodate." "That's the wisdom that comes from experiences like yours," she observed, "learning the difference between what impresses others and what truly nurtures you." As we reached downtown, the familiar skyline of Oak Ridge rising against the afternoon sky, I felt a surge of anticipation that had nothing to do with the professional achievements or social status that had once defined my goals. The future stretching before me, uncertain but authentically mine, offered possibilities I was only beginning to imagine. The sale of the Pinecrest house hadn't just generated financial capital, it had created space for a different kind of investment in myself, in my redefined values, in a life designed around my genuine preferences rather than compromises that had gradually eroded my sense of self. James had his architectural monument, built according to his vision, but emptied of the relationship that was supposed to fill it. I had something far more valuable: the freedom to create a life that reflected my authentic self, not distorted by someone else's expectations or betrayed by someone else's deception. As we pulled up to my office building, Catherine turned to me with an unusually personal observation. "You know, in 15 years of practice, I've seen hundreds of clients navigate divorce. The ones who truly thrive afterward aren't those who win the biggest settlements or exact the most satisfying revenge. They're the ones who reclaim their stories, who refuse to be defined by betrayal or loss, who build something new that honors who they've become through the experience." Her words resonated with the journey I'd been navigating, from shock and anger through strategic self-protection to this emerging sense of possibility. The confrontation at my parents' garden party, so carefully planned to expose James's betrayal, had been only the first step in a much longer process of reclamation. "I'm working on it," I told her with genuine optimism. "One decision at a time." "That's all any of us can do," she replied with a rare smile. "And from where I'm sitting, you're doing it remarkably well." As I stepped out of her car and into the bright afternoon sunlight, I carried with me not just the financial proceeds of the transaction we'd completed, but a renewed conviction that the house James had coveted, the house he'd been willing to deceive and betray me to obtain, had never been the most valuable asset in our shared story. A perfect backdrop for tonight's celebration. The housewarming party was scheduled to begin in 2 hours. My official re-entry into Oak Ridge social life as the newly divorced, professionally thriving, emotionally resilient Elaine Wilson. The guest list included family, colleagues, and friends I'd reconnected with after years of gradual distancing during my marriage to James. "Are you nervous?" Sophia asked, perceptive as always about the undercurrents beneath my composed exterior. I considered the question honestly. "A little," I admitted. "It's the first time many of these people will see me since the divorce was finalized. I know there's been talk." "Of course there's been talk," Sophia shrugged, practical as always. People love drama, especially when it involves someone as put together as you, publicly unraveling a cheating spouse's deception. But anyone who matters knows you've handled everything with remarkable grace. Grace might be an overstatement. I smiled, remembering the very public confrontation at my father's retirement party. Strategic vengeance, perhaps. Justifiable consequences, Sophia corrected, raising her glass in a toast. To new beginnings in old houses. To foundations that last, I countered, clinking my glass against hers and taking a moment to appreciate how far I'd come in the past 9 months. The divorce had been finalized 4 months earlier, with surprisingly little conflict once the Pinecrest property was removed from contention. James had been fair, even generous, in the division of our remaining assets, perhaps out of guilt, or perhaps recognizing that protracted legal battles would benefit neither of us. We had no children to consider, no family business to untangle, just the accumulated detritus of 7 years together to sort and separate. My professional life had blossomed at the Westridge office, my client roster expanding as my reputation for steady guidance through volatile markets grew. Just last month, Douglas had approached me about a junior partnership track, an opportunity that would have been unthinkable a year ago when I was still navigating the immediate aftermath of personal crisis. As my family arrived for the housewarming, my parents, Daniel and Rachel with their children, even my former in-laws Margaret and William, who had maintained a warm relationship with me despite the circumstances, I felt a profound sense of gratitude for the network of support that had sustained me through the darkest days of discovery and divorce. The house gradually filled with laughter and conversation, the Victorians' character-filled rooms providing perfect gathering spaces for the meaningful connections I now prioritized over the socially advantageous relationships James had always cultivated. Each guest who admired a carefully restored feature or commented on the warmth of the space affirmed that this home, unlike the Pinecrest property, truly reflected who I was rather than who someone else wanted me to be. Elaine, a familiar voice called from the entryway late in the evening. I turned to find Greg, Natalie's husband, standing somewhat awkwardly with an envelope in hand. "Greg," I greeted him with surprise. "Natalie mentioned you were traveling for work." "I was," he confirmed, shifting slightly. "Got back early. Listen, there's something you should probably know." He lowered his voice, glancing around to ensure privacy. "James is engaged to someone from the architectural firm, Charlotte Miller." The news landed with surprising gentleness, like an expected letter finally arriving after its contents have already been anticipated and processed. "I see," I said simply. "That seems rather quick." 4 months, Greg confirmed. "Natalie didn't want to tell you tonight. Thought it might spoil your housewarming, but I figured you'd rather hear it from family than through gossip." I appreciated his consideration, though the information itself created barely a ripple in my emotional landscape. "Thank you for telling me, and you're right. Better to hear it directly." After Greg rejoined the party, I took a moment alone in the kitchen, assessing my reaction to James's news. 9 months ago, this would have devastated me. Now I felt only mild curiosity about the woman who would occupy the Pinecrest house with him, completing the vision he'd designed for a different future. "Everything okay?" Sophia appeared in the doorway, her intuition for emotional undercurrents as reliable as ever. "James is engaged," I informed her, keeping my voice neutral, "to someone from his firm." Sophia's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "Well, that was fast. Are you all right?" "Yes," I said after careful consideration. "I genuinely am. It's like hearing news about a distant acquaintance. Interesting information, but not personally significant." "That's healthy," Sophia observed, studying me for signs of hidden distress, and apparently finding none. "Though I wouldn't judge you if you felt like breaking something." I laughed, appreciating her unwavering support. "I've done enough breaking and rebuilding this year. I'm ready for the construction phase of life, rather than the demolition." As the evening continued, I moved through rooms filled with people who had witnessed my journey from betrayal to rebuilding, each conversation affirming that the connections that truly mattered had not only survived, but strengthened through the crisis. My parents beamed with evident pride at my resilience. Daniel raised a quiet toast to my epic comeback, and even Margaret Wilson embraced me with genuine affection, our relationship having evolved into something new but still valuable. By midnight, as the last guests departed and I began the satisfying process of restoring order to my home, I felt a profound sense of completion. The Victorian house around me, with its solid foundation, carefully preserved character, and thoughtfully updated systems, mirrored my own transformation over the past year. James had his dream house in Pinecrest, built to his exact specifications, and soon to be shared with his new fiancée. I had something infinitely more valuable, a life authentically mine, shaped by conscious choice rather than compromise or convention, rich with connections that had withstood the ultimate test of crisis. The husband who spent our savings on his girlfriend had inadvertently given me something priceless: the opportunity to discover who I truly was beyond the constraints of a relationship that had gradually diminished rather than enhanced my authentic self. The dream house he'd coveted had become the instrument of my financial security and his eventual accountability. Standing in the quiet of my living room after everyone had gone, I gazed at the fireplace I'd uncovered beneath layers of modern drywall, a hidden gem from the home's original construction, now restored to its proper place as the heart of the space. Like that fireplace, my authentic self had been gradually covered over during years of marriage to James, my preferences and passions layered beneath compromises that eventually obscured who I truly was. The process of restoration, both of the house and of myself, had been laborious and at times painful, requiring careful removal of accumulated damage, assessment of structural integrity, and patient rebuilding with materials that honored original character while ensuring future stability. But the result was something far more valuable than the sleek modernity of the Pinecrest house had ever been. A home that reflected genuine history, embraced imperfection as evidence of resilience, and created space for authentic connection, rather than impressive display. As I extinguished lights and prepared for the evening's end, I caught my reflection in the antique mirror I'd rescued from an estate sale and lovingly restored. The woman who gazed back appeared simultaneously familiar and transformed, like the Victorian house itself, original character preserved while structural improvements created something more solid and sustainable. The dream house had never really been the point. The true prize was the life I now claimed as exclusively, authentically mine, built on a foundation of self-knowledge that no betrayal could ever again undermine. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.